everyone, my name is Amanda Thomas, and I'd like to welcome you to A Scientist Walks Into a Bar. This podcast will feature recordings of talks that were given by scientists in the Pacific Northwest, generally in Portland, Oregon, or Vancouver, Washington. These events and this podcast are created by VIA Productions, and we here at VIA think that it's a lot more fun to learn while drinking beer. So chances are that during these talks, the speaker and the audience members all had pints in their hands. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast or how to attend one of our science education events for adults, please check out our website at www.viaproductions.org.
And I know, we talked about this a little earlier, but some of you, we are in Portland, you're looking at that guy going, if I lick that, would I get high?
That was just a quick taste of what you can expect coming up. In this episode, we'll hear the talk, Some Like It Cool and Damp, Amphibians of the Northwest, by Dr. Ivan Phillipsen. Ivan has a PhD in zoology from Oregon State University and runs a tour company called Volcano Lands, where they take people on hikes through the wilderness here in Oregon and Washington and teach people about science as they're walking along. While you're hiking, you learn about geology and biology and all the cool plants and animals that you see along the trail, and it's super fun. And if you're in our area, or you're going to be in the Pacific Northwest sometime soon, I definitely recommend checking out volcanolands.com. Ivan is an expert on all sorts of plants and animals, but his first love is amphibians. Here's what he had to say at our event in Portland on April 1st, 2014.
Okay, so I'm Ivan, and I love amphibians. I want to thank you guys for being here to let me indulge me to talk about the thing that I love. I have loved amphibians since I was a little kid. This is a drawing I did when I was, I think, 6, 1982 or so, 30 years ago or something like that. And I lived in the desert in Southern California, and there weren't really any amphibians around. But I got this thing, I got some books, and I started reading about them, and I just thought they were so fascinating and cool, and I just fell in love with them. And so I drew this salamander. It's a Northwestern Salamander. It's one of the species that lives here in our region. Don't know why I picked that one, but I did. And so it's really cool for me to be here, decades later, talking to you about these things that I love. I, grew up in Southern California. I studied amphibians in grad school down there to get my master's. Studied the California tree frog. And then I wanted to continue my graduate education because I just didn't want to leave school, didn't want to get a real job, and applied to a few different places and got accepted here in Oregon and at Oregon State University. And when I was flying into Portland, looking out the window, and I had been here before, but I looked out the window and I saw all the green and all the trees, and I just said, yeah, this is totally it. Because growing up in the desert, I looked to this place as somewhere that was kind of like a mecca or a hot spot for amphibians. I was like, man, they're all up there. All these salamanders and frogs are hanging out where it's like this. It's mossy, it's green, there's ferns. There's just all this habitat, and it's fantastic. So, I came here, and it was like coming home to me. So I'm very thankful to be here. And it's great for amphibians. Okay, so let's just talk about some generalities for amphibians first, and then I'll get into the specifics of some species that are in our backyard here. So the word amphibian comes from the ancient Greek, like so much does, and amphi and bios, meaning both life, and then that eventually became the noun amphibion, which means living in both the water and land. And we all hopefully know that amphibians spend part of their lives in the water, like a lot of these aquatic insects, and then the adults spend their lives on the land. In general, that's the general pattern. Amphibians are a really ancient group. This guy is Tiktaalik, and this is an organism for which we found fossils only in 2004 up in Canada. And this is a missing link between fish and amphibians, and all the paleontologists and scientists were flipping out because they were like, oh my God, we found this thing, it's so amazing. It lived in the water. It was still kind of like a fish, but it lived in shallow water. It could probably gulp air and breathe air to some extent. But the point is, this thing lived 375 million years ago. It wasn't too many more millions of years later that amphibians came out on land. So they were the first terrestrial vertebrates, the first organisms that had backbones that came onto land. They're really, really old. They've been through a hell of a lot. They've been through a lot of huge, massive extinctions, and they're still here. They're survivors, although hopefully they'll make it through this extinction that we're putting them through now, which I'll talk a little more about later. Okay, so we've got frogs. Everybody knows frogs. Everybody knows and loves frogs. We have salamanders. That's the other major group of amphibians. And this is sort of the general taxonomy. And then there's a third group called caecilians, and they're these worm-like amphibians that are kind of weird, and we call them caecilians because they all come from the island of Sicily off the end of, no, they don't, because it's April Fool's and that's not true. It's not Sicilian, it's Sicilian, right? So it's spelled completely differently, so make sure you get that right, okay? But they look like this. This is true. This is a real thing. It's not a worm. It's not a millipede. It's a freaking amphibian. It is worm-like. Some of these things are 6 feet long. They have very reduced eyes, no legs. They're very weird animals. They live in the tropics mostly. They burrow, they swim. Really cool. Not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about them, but this guy, I found this guy on the internet, and I fell in love with this guy. Because, first of all, he's having a great time eating like cat food or something, whatever, in an aquarium. He's very happy about it. And he looks kind of like a sock puppet. And his eyes are diminished the way a lot of these Sicilians are. But he also kind of looks like Barney the dinosaur from Barney and Friends, for those of you who remember that. So I think Barney the Sicilian, I got an idea for a new show. So I think I would be into that if I was, a kid. Anyway, so no more about Sicilians, sorry to say. But frogs. Frogs are awesome, right? Who doesn't like frogs? Who thinks, frogs are scary or gross or whatever? I mean, frogs are just great. They're cool. They're benign. I actually knew a guy who was terrified of frogs, and it was just like mind-boggling to me that somebody could be afraid of a frog because they don't like come at you. They don't bite, for the most part. They can, but there's a huge diversity of species, and they come in all shapes and sizes and colors, and they rival birds in their colors and their forms. There's ugly ones, there's beautiful ones, there's ones that were created by George Lucas, but there's also, real ones. They're very diverse, so I think, we kind of underappreciate them. Birds are out there, they're much more visible, we see them in the trees, and amphibians are out there, they're just not as easy to find. Frogs, in particular. But salamanders are also often very beautiful and very diverse. They're amazing, and they're all over the place. Now, one thing that people do is they often confuse salamanders with lizards, right? Because they have a superficial resemblance to lizards. They have that long tail, 4 legs, whatever. Totally unrelated to lizards. Not even close, right? They're probably more closely related to us than they are to lizards. I don't know if that's true, but it's just superficial. It's like dolphins and sharks look similar, right? They're not at all related. So just get that in your head. My grandpa, who came from Arkansas, and was 96 when he died a few years ago, he called them crick lizards. These are from the crick, lizards. And he never got it. No, Grandpa, amphibians, crick lizards. So, because he's the grandpa and he knows. Okay, so amphibians have a really interesting life cycle. It's one of their defining characteristics that a lot of us learn about in school, so I'll try to just kind of breeze through it here. But it starts off with the adults who are, it's that time of year, it's spring, and they're interested in breeding, and so the male goes out and the male sings, and this is another thing they kind of share with birds, which is really cool. Amphibians have unique songs. Each species has a unique song. The male goes out and he blows air through his little larynx and he magnifies the sound that he makes with his vocal sac, and then sometimes it can be like deafeningly loud if you're standing near them, or you can hear it about a mile away depending on the species, right? And he's basically saying, hey, I'm the hottest thing in this pond. It's time, ladies, right? And that's what he's just, and each one is saying that, me, I'm the best. And apparently it works, for whatever reason, for reasons we can't understand, the females will pick one over the other. They all look the same to us. Next thing that happens is this awesome thing called amplexus, where the male grasps the female from behind very tightly. Sometimes he actually even creates like a glue on his hands that just binds him to her, and she's not getting anywhere. She's not getting away. This might go on for days sometimes. The female's often larger, and that's because she produces the eggs, so her body needs to actually be larger to produce all those eggs. So amplexus is, this is the first step to the external fertilization, and then you got these guys who look like they just got caught in the act. Their parents just came home and flipped on the light switch, and awkward. So anyway, but these are beautiful frogs. These are glass frogs. So this is amplexus. Frogs and other amphibians have external fertilization. So the male ejects sperm onto the eggs, which the female has just released, into the environment, and now the eggs are fertilized. And amphibian eggs have this gelatinous covering which protects them from the environment in general, but it doesn't really protect them completely from drying out. And that's one of the limitations for amphibians. They need to have their eggs where there's moisture. If the eggs aren't in the water, they're somewhere moist, like in the tropics on a very wet tree branch or leaf, or under a log in the forest, somewhere where it's damp. So that's a limitation for these guys. Unlike reptiles who have those leathery eggs that can resist drying that we talked about earlier. So then everybody's favorite thing, the tadpoles, the little adorable sperm-shaped things that come out afterwards, and by the gazillions that are in ponds and things. And they're called tadpoles for frogs. For salamanders, we just call them larvae. Just we don't have a cute name for them, but they're all larvae. But we call frog larvae tadpoles. Salamander larvae look different. And one major difference actually is that frog tadpoles are herbivorous. They eat algae and things, whereas salamander larvae are carnivorous. They eat little insects or tadpoles. And salamander larvae have external gills. That's the little fluffy things coming off the back of their head. Tadpoles, frog larvae, have internal gills. And these guys, their front legs come out first as they're developing, whereas for frog tadpoles, the back legs come out first. So there's a bunch of differences. But so if you see something out there and it's got external gills, then you're looking at a salamander larva. And then you get little adorable guys like this who are somewhere in the middle where still have a tail, but they basically look like a little frog. In a couple days, this guy will lose that tail and he'll become a froglet or a metamorph, as we biologists like to call them. Not quite as cute as froglet, but they are adorable. Usually they just, fit on the tip of your pinky, very small little guys. So that's the life cycle. I know that guy will grow up and repeat the whole thing and carry it on. Skin is also a really distinguishing feature of amphibians. This guy is a Sonoran, or Colorado river toad, I should say. Is one of the names. This guy's got some beautiful skin. He's very regal looking here, just hanging out. And the skin keeps him moist. It keeps the moisture in his body, just like our skin does. But one difference is that their skin is permeable. Our skin isn't really permeable. Theirs, they can lose a lot of water through their skin, and they can also absorb it through their skin. They can also absorb oxygen through their skin. So a lot of things go back and forth across their skin. So they have to do a lot of things to keep their skin moist. So they actually exude mucus that helps keep their skin moist. They hang out by water a lot. They really have to keep that skin kind of moist and functioning. Otherwise, they dry out quickly. So that they're really dependent on water. But they also have all these really cool glands in their skin. And it's really remarkable, all of the chemical compounds that they can make. And I know, we talked about this a little earlier, but some of you, we are in Portland, you're looking at that guy going, if I lick that, would I get high? And your answer is yes, because this is the Colorado river toad, and this is one of the species that people do, in fact, extract hallucinogenic compounds from the skin of this toad. So you would get some kind of reaction from these guys. And apparently you can do this without hurting them, which is, thumbs up in my book of, not having to kill them to do that. You probably piss it off by doing, like trying to get it to get it mad enough to exude some toxins. But basically they produce all these different compounds, and it's not just poisons. They produce antibiotics to protect themselves from infections. They can produce waxy substances to coat themselves, to keep themselves from drying out. All kinds of interesting things. But of course, it's the poisons that we think is most interesting. And these guys have gotten a lot of press, right? The poison dart frogs of South America. It's this group of beautiful frogs that come in all these amazing different colors. And what they're advertising is, hey, I am super effing poisonous. Do not touch me. There's blue, yellow, red, everything you can think of. And they are ridiculously poisonous. At least a lot of them are. The Native Americans down there they actually, got the poison from these frogs to tip their blowgun darts to hunt monkeys and things in the trees, and it was very effective use of the poison from these guys. And they're just gorgeous. They have this great warning coloration. We find it beautiful, but if you were a bird or a snake, you'd be like, whoa, back off, right? They also exude things like glue. This is a black salamander that I found in North Carolina a few years ago, and I picked this guy up, and he got mad enough at me that he started ejecting this milky substance from his tail here. And that stuff was like crazy glue. It got on my fingers, and I couldn't even, it glued my fingers together, and I had to, of course I dropped the salamander, it worked. And, but I couldn't get that stuff off my hands for days. It was ridiculous. It really was amazing. So there's this whole pharmacopoeia of chemical compounds that are produced by the skin glands of these amphibians. It's really remarkable. Another thing they can do with their skin is it helps them camouflage themselves. So this is the California tree frog. This is the species I studied in California. And this is a granite rock by a stream. And what these guys do is they just sit tight close to the stream, don't move, and nobody sees them until they move. And so there he is. You can probably see him now, the little eyes there, nostrils. But, I mean, you could be sitting next to 40 of these things if you don't know what you're looking for, and you would not know they're there. They're just all around you. And it's like, I don't know, like not Where's Waldo, but those things, those painting things you could like stare at, and for a while, all of a sudden these like pictures would jump out at you. That's like from the 90s, sorry, but it's a long time ago. But these things, they're really cool. A lot of amphibians do this. It's really remarkable. Okay. The ecological importance. Like, why care? Other than the fact that they're adorable and you want to hug them and take them home and put them in a terrarium, who cares about frogs and salamanders and all that? You should care because they're very important to the ecosystems that they live in. They eat a bunch of other things, like things that you don't like mosquitoes and creepy other bugs and insects, I should say. But they eat a lot of other things, and other things eat them. They occupy this kind of central role space in like the food webs or the food chains in their ecosystem. So if you take the amphibians out, there's going to be a chain reaction in the food chains in those ecosystems. A lot of bad things could happen. And that's really something that underscores the fact that amphibians are really in trouble around the world. We have this massive epidemic of amphibian declines around the world. If you haven't heard of this, it's been in the news and stuff, but it's a lot of scientists are talking about it, but I don't know how much the public knows about it. And of course, we talked about earlier, the main problem there is habitat destruction. These things live in the tropics a lot. Tropical rainforests are being cut down. And that's true for a lot of organisms, not just amphibians. These guys are having a real hard time with habitat destruction. There's also a disease that's going around that's affecting amphibians specifically, chytridiomycosis. It's a fungal pathogen that gets on their skin and kills them that way because they have their skin is very sensitive, the permeable skin. That's a huge issue, and it's probably being transported to some extent by humans. They also are vulnerable to toxins in the environment, pollutants, pesticides, things like that. And there's invasive species. I mean, they're basically just getting hammered from 4 or 5 different directions, and it's really bad. There's probably 30 to 50% of the world's amphibians that are declining or at risk of extinction in the coming decades. And within our lifetimes, we'll see this basically mass extinction of these amphibians that a lot of people just don't really think about much in their daily lives, and it's a very sad thing. This is a map of the diversity of amphibians around the world. The red and yellow colors are the places where there's lots of amphibians. Blue and green, not as many. And you can see that they're concentrated in the tropics, South America, Africa, Indonesia, Southeast Asia. In fact, we have a bunch in the southeastern United States, which is pretty cool. And we have a tiny little yellow blob up there. It's hard to see on this map, but that's where we are. We are in a minor hotspot for amphibian diversity, which is great. There's about 7,000 species of amphibians in the world. And comparably, to compare, there's 10,000 species of birds, I think maybe 5,000 something species of mammals, and a gazillion insects. So I mean, insects don't even compare, but there's a lot of amphibians. There's quite a lot. In the Northwest here, if you consider just Oregon and Washington, we have about 13 species of frogs. We have 22 species of salamanders, and sad to say, 0 species of Sicilians. I know you're very disappointed. You were about, man, as soon as I'm out of here, I'm going to go look for some Sicilians. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about are just a few species that you're probably familiar with, and then I'll talk about some less familiar species. Oh, this guy. Everybody's seen this guy. This is the Pacific chorus frog. If you haven't seen one of these, then you haven't been here long enough or you're blind or something, because these things are everywhere. They're about an inch or 2 long. They're very cute. They have little pads at the tips of their toes, which helps them climb on all kinds of things, including your windows and the outside of your house. They're very common. They are in your backyard. They're in city parks. They're in the east side of the Cascades, the west side. They're all over the place. They're habitat generalists. And you can tell them apart from other frogs by their general small size, those toe pads, but they also have this mask, this dark eye line here, which is pretty distinctive. Color is a little tricky because they're often, they're different color varieties. So this one is green and brown. This guy is all brown. And I will say that when you hear a frog calling, if you're out in the spring and you hear frogs, calling from a pond in the dark, it's these guys. There's nothing else that you're going to hear that has that really distinct ribbit call. These are the guys that have been recorded for gazillions of Hollywood movies because they live in Southern California too. So if you hear that classic frog sound, it's these guys. Our other native frogs here in the Northwest you don't hear them very much. Their voices are much more soft and quiet, and you don't hear them so much. They also come in beautiful green colors, and amazingly, they also come in blue flavor, which is awesome. This is really rare. It's a genetic variant that you don't see. I've never seen one in the wild. I would love to. If I do, I'll probably have to scoop them up and take them home, which, no, I won't, because that's bad. But it would be really cool to see one of these. So hopefully you've seen these around and that you get a chance to. You can pick them up, and they're really, really cool little guys. They can jump really far. They're great. These guys, though, this is where you go, boo, bad, bullfrog, right? All right, so I said there are 13 species of frogs in the Northwest. A couple of them are introduced, and this one is invasive. Humans brought these guys here. They don't belong here. They're from the eastern United States. They're very big. They are cool animals. They're cool where they're supposed to be back home. But here, they're a big problem because they eat the hell out of everything. They just eat and eat and eat. They eat bats. This guy's very pleased with himself. I caught a bat. How the hell did I do that? Well, you did. Congratulations, bullfrog. And then this guy caught a freaking bird. I don't know, like a duck or a pigeon or something. He's not going to be able to eat it, but he caught it and killed it. These guys are ridiculous. They eat snakes, they eat turtles, they eat fish, they eat other bullfrogs, our native frogs. Anything that moves they can get in their mouth, they will try to eat it. Feet? That's a good question. Yeah, you know what? I bet if you wiggled your toes in front of them, it would totally go for it. So, good question. They don't have, also a good question, they don't have big sharp teeth, so it'd probably just be like, oh, silly bullfrog, and then just... What eats bullfrogs? Herons will eat bullfrogs, like large birds. Big enough snakes would probably eat them. I mean, they have natural predators, raccoons and things, back east. Here, when you have a species that's introduced somewhere, it's often the predators there don't know what to do with it necessarily, so that's part of the problem is they kind of just run amok, So bullfrogs, boo. These guys, however. Oh, that's the proper reaction. This is the rough-skinned newt, and you've all seen these, hopefully. If you've ever gone out hiking, you've seen these at some point or another. This is a really young one. It's very cute. They have a dark brown dorsal surface, and they're bright orange underneath. They're called rough-skinned newt for a reason. They have lots of glands in their skin that makes them have a rough-looking appearance. It's a Tarica granulosa, like a granular skin. And these things walk around just middle of the day. They don't give a shit because they're just walking around like, I'm a newt, I don't have to run, I don't have to hide, I don't have to do anything. You know why? Because I am the most poisonous animal in North America. Right there in your backyard. Okay, seriously, I'm not kidding. This is the most poisonous thing because it produces this substance called tetrodotoxin, TTX, which is the same poison that's in puffer fish, which in Japan they make these magical chefs prepare this meal that if they prepare it wrong, you're going to die because it has this puffer fish toxin in it. The blue-ringed octopus in Australia, ridiculously toxic, same thing, TTX. Cool story about this is that people prior to like the 1950s didn't even know these things were poisonous. So there were these 3 hunters out in Oregon, and I don't know if this is a true story, but it was the way I read it was as though it was a true story. 3 hunters are out there. They get found dead, laying by their campfire. Nobody knows what killed them. There's a coffee pot with a dead newt in it. And so some biologist came along and said, God, I wonder if that newt's poisonous. And sure enough, they started studying it. And yeah, this newt is ridiculously poisonous. One newt can kill dozens of people, the amount of poison that's in its skin. So it's very possible a newt just happened to crawl into that coffee pot, died, the poison got released into the coffee, killed those guys. Now, the thing is, you can actually handle these guys, and I have many times, you probably have, some of you kids do it. It is safe to handle these guys because you have to either ingest their skin or you have to get it into your bloodstream in order for this toxin to work. So if you're just holding them, they're not going to nothing's going to happen. I mean, that said, just to cover myself legally here, make sure I'm not telling you to go out and hold newts. My lawyer says that not to tell you that, but wash your hands afterwards, don't put it in your mouth and, all kinds, just be smart because they are very poisonous. Now, if you piss the newt off enough, if you're like petting it really hard, and you're like, you're so cute, I'm going to just pet you. Well, it's going to do this eventually, and this is called Unken reflex. And this is a defensive posture that says, hey, I'm really poisonous. Let me show you my beautiful, bright color underneath that tells you I'm toxic, just like those poison dart frogs. And not only does this species do this, other frogs and other salamanders do this. So if you see this, you're doing it wrong. Okay, you're the newt is not happy. You can back away from the newt. Okay. Okay. So in the spring and the fall they migrate. So in the spring, now they're migrating from the forest to where they breed. They go down to these little ponds or slow-moving streams, and they cross roads and they cross hiking trails. And I've seen a lot of them crushed on hiking trails. It's very sad because they're hard to see. People aren't looking for them. On the road, too, just total massacre, just killed on the roads where they migrate. So I'm going to start selling I Break for Newts bumper stickers, and I will distribute them to all of you. And, that way, if you just slam your brakes on for a newt and somebody gets mad, just be like, dude, bumper sticker. I forewarned you. So anyway, you see them out on the roads a lot, so just keep your eyes out for them. I think that's all I wanted to say about these guys. Oh, except for this sexy situation right here. So they go down to these breeding ponds, and normally it's one male, one female, and they do the amplexus, and everything's beautiful. But Newts do this thing. The multiple males will try to mate with the same female, and I don't know if she's into it or not, but it's this newt ball that happens, and that's what they call it, a newt ball, because sometimes there's like 20 of them in a big ball, and they're just writhing around, and it's ridiculous. And I don't even, I don't know who wins the reproductive battle there, but the female's going to reproduce. It's just a question of which male gets lucky. But anyway, kind of ridiculous. These are California newts. This is a different species, but closely related. Because, they're from California. We don't do this sort of thing in Oregon. But this used to be called Bufo boreas was the scientific name. It's been changed to Anaxarus boreas, which doesn't quite roll off the tongue the way the old one did. But it's the boreal toad, or northern toad. It's our most kind of toad-like guy that you're going to see in the mountains around here. They got the warts. They're kind of stumpy, and they kind of just walk or kind of waddle. They don't jump really far like a lot of our other frogs, but they're very cool, very cute. They're not nearly as toxic as the newt, for example, but they do have the glands, and they do produce toxins. So if like a dog bites these guys and messes with it, it's gonna upset the dog. There is some poison there. Very cool. They're declining in the west across their range. Not really sure why. Very sad. But if you're up in the mountains, you might see these guys in the lakes. This is the red-legged frog. There was actually an article recently in the Oregonian, I believe, about these guys here in Portland. Some people helping these guys cross the road, because just like the newts, they do that thing where they migrate to their breeding ponds. Some very nice people helping them get across the road. Kind of a nondescript frog a little bit. They're large. They're not as big as a bullfrog, but they live in the Willamette Valley in the low elevation areas and a lot of the wetlands, and they're very cool. Unfortunately, they do get hit by cars. This is one that I found, and you can see why they call them red-legged frogs, very bright red color underneath. Very cool frogs. A similar species is the Oregon spotted frog, which you may have heard of. These guys are basically endangered. They're not federally listed yet, but they're in big trouble. I studied this species in grad school, did some genetic work on these guys. It's not a great situation. They used to be in the Willamette Valley. They're completely gone from the Willamette Valley. They're in scattered populations in the Cascades, but there is a reproduction, or there's a program at the Oregon Zoo where they're trying to breed them, and there's also a couple other programs going on where they're trying to help these guys out. So hopefully some of those programs will succeed. Really cool frogs. Okay, but even cooler frog is the tailed frog. This is one of I think, the most interesting amphibians in the Northwest. It's only here in the Northwest. It's about the size of the tree frog, so superficially similar to the tree frog. Kind of brown, nondescript, but if you look at the eye is cat-like, so it has that vertical pupil like a cat. That's one way you can tell right away. It does have a little eye stripe going through, kind of like the tree frog, but if you look for that vertical pupil, you'll know it's a tailed frog, and it's also a specialist in stream habitats. They live in the foothills and in the mountains in these fast-flowing, cold mountain streams, and they have several really neat adaptations to living in that environment. Their tadpoles have suction cups on their mouths. They can cling to rocks, so in the fast-flowing stream, they don't get washed away. They just can grab onto the rock. The males do not sing. They have no voice because, hey, they could be yelling as loud as they want, and if it's just all this, like, loud, turbulent water going on, the female could just be right over here, and she wouldn't even hear him. So what's the point in singing in a loud environment like that? So they don't sing. And probably the most interesting thing is the quote-unquote tail. Now, it's not a true tail. It is a copulatory organ, and it's only in the males. So human males also have a copulatory organ. Now, this is not, however, this is not a penis. It's not a tail, and it's not a penis, but it does the same thing as a penis. It has the same function. Again, these guys are living in these fast-flowing streams, so you have If you're trying to have external fertilization, you throw some eggs out there, you throw some sperm out there, whew, gone, right? So much for that. This is the only frog species in the world that has internal fertilization because of the environment they live in. This is an adaptation to that, so it's really cool. So it's, it's not a tail, it's not a penis, it's whatever, it's the thing they have. It should be called the copulatory organ frog. But it can be spelled O-R-E, anyway. It's like the state. Anyway, these guys are really cool. So keep an eye out for these. They're actually fairly common. If you're in the streams, just kind of flip rocks over and stuff, and you'll find them. They're really neat. Okay, so on to some salamanders. We have a bunch of these salamanders that are in a group called lungless salamanders. And it's a good name because they don't have any lungs. They came from ancestors that had lungs, but they lost their lungs through evolutionary time. They're very small. They live in moist places. So like I said, permeable skin. These guys are able to get all of their oxygen through their skin. They don't need lungs where they live. They're also all terrestrial, which means that they lay their eggs on land. They lay them under logs and in moist places. They don't return to water to breed. So they're pretty good at that. This is an ensatina, very cute. These guys live in our forest and they live under logs and stuff. They just hunt around in decaying logs in the forest. And there's a lot of neat things about these guys. One way you can tell them apart from other salamanders is they have a little constriction at the base of their tail there, and they can actually drop their tail like a lizard if they're attacked by a predator. Another cool one is the larch mountain salamander. Now we have a lot of salamanders that look like this, little pencil-thin guys, hard to tell apart. I want to talk about this one because it's neat because it lives only in the Columbia River Gorge, nowhere else in the world, on the Oregon side and the Washington side, a little further into Washington, but it lives under rocks, under talus, only in the Columbia River Gorge. So if we lose this guy, if habitats get messed up around the gorge, this species is gone forever. So hopefully we'll do a good job of protecting the gorge the way we have and keep these guys around forever. Okay, the last species I'll talk about that I think is arguably the coolest is the coastal giant salamander. This is an adult. Now giant, you're thinking, oh man, thing's gonna be like 8 feet long. No, it's not that big. I don't have a hand here for reference, but it's 14 inches long. It's big for a salamander, and it's very stocky, very beefy salamander. They're really good predators. They have gorgeous patterns on their back, this kind of marbled patterning with some gold and silver fleck, very pretty. They are voracious predators, and they're actually one of the only predators of our famous banana slugs because they can deal with all that mucus and slime that the banana slugs produce somehow. And they'll eat each other, they're cannibalistic, it's kind of like the bullfrog, just something moves in front of it, they go for it. Their larvae live in the streams, and they're major predators in our streams. When a lot of these streams don't have fish, or even if they do have fish, these guys play a significant role in eating a lot of these aquatic insects or other small salamanders. An interesting thing about these giant salamanders is a lot of these guys don't ever turn into a terrestrial adult. They just become a big larva that becomes sexually active, sexually mature, and they keep the external gills. They look like larvae, but they can totally breed and reproduce that way. So that's one of the things they do. In any given population, some percentage of them will stay in the water forever. Some will transform into terrestrial adults. And that's about how big they are. That's a good-sized larva. That's me holding one a few years ago, just so you get a feeling for how big they are. Very cool. It's the largest terrestrial salamander in the world. So that's it. And they don't get any bigger than this. There is a tiger salamander back east. It's roughly the same size, but we'll say, that ours is bigger. It's super cool. If you get a chance to see one of these guys, they are out. They're not super rare. Hopefully you will, and that'll be great. It's the biggest terrestrial salamander in the world, but it does not compare to the largest aquatic salamander in the world, which we do not have. This is in Asia, so there are two species actually. There's the Japanese giant salamander and the Chinese giant salamander. They get up to about 6 feet long, 100 pounds, something like that. Completely aquatic. I think they breathe air, but super cool, super huge. It's the largest amphibian in the world. And apparently, at some point or another, the samurai would have like epic battles with these salamanders and like stick the sword right in its neck and like take that salamander that probably wouldn't actually bite me or hurt me at all, but anyway, really cool. We don't have any kind of amphibians here in the Northwest that we would have epic battles with, but they're adorable. We don't want to hurt them anyway, so it's all good. So last little just 30-second thing is, hey, I want to go find amphibians. How do I do that? Go to ponds, that's a big place. Wetlands, they're always hanging out in the wetlands or around the edges of ponds, especially in the spring and summer. You can look under logs along hiking trails. I do that all the time, just, like a small log that I can turn gently. You can often find ensatinas or western redback salamanders in there. A really fun thing to do, I think, is to go night driving, is what I call it. You get a really bright light, like a spotlight or a flashlight and your headlamp, and you go out on some quiet backcountry roads in the Willamette Valley, especially near wildlife refuges or kind of more wild places, and you just drive really slowly along, especially on a wet, well, it really needs to be a wet night, either raining, and it needs to be kind of warm. And you'll find ridiculous numbers of amphibians sometimes. This night I went out, I think I found like 7 or 8 species of salamanders and frogs and all kinds of neat stuff that you would totally not even be aware of. You just plow over all that stuff just driving along. So if you know just how to slow down and look in the right places, these guys are all over the place, and they're absolutely fascinating. And I hope you guys will get out there and appreciate some of them. So last take-home message is, hey kids, do not put newts in your mouth. If you learn nothing else tonight. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening. I'll be posting more episodes soon on topics ranging from the Missoula floods to mind-controlling parasites, so please check back. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or what topics are coming up at our Science on Tap events, please check out our website at viaproductions.org or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/scienceontapORWA. That last bit stands for Oregon and Washington. Before I go, I'd like to say a special thank you to my group of loyal volunteers and friends who I affectionately call the Minions. Really, it says Minion on their name tags. They do everything behind the scenes at the events to make sure things actually happen, from selling tickets to making sure the lights work to making sure I actually slow down long enough to eat something so I don't get all hangry, and generally making sure that things run really smoothly. The Minions are Scott Fry, Michelle Herman, Sam Lauk, Ashley Miller, Rita Nygren, Katie Parsons, Stephen Perry, Antje Spethman, and Chris Trone. There's really no way I could do this without you guys. Thank you. Also, a final thank you to Jonathan Coulton for letting us use his song Mandelbrot Set as our theme music.
You're a heart-shaped box of strings and wire in one badass fucking fractal, and you're just in time to save the day.